That night, Chicago looked nothing like the vibrant, dynamic city people often praised. It was wrapped in a heavy, dark blanket, drenched and gloomy. An early summer downpour had suddenly unleashed itself with near-furious intensity, its cold, violent gusts of rain battering the windows of a luxurious estate situated in the quiet, affluent suburbs of the North Shore. My name is Natalia. Sitting in the back seat of the town car, my head resting against the glass, I felt exhausted as I watched the long streaks of rain falling like tears. An urgent business trip to New York had ended earlier than expected. Missing my husband and the warmth of my home, I had caught a late-night flight back to Chicago without letting him know. I wanted to give him a little surprise. My husband Daniel would probably be working in his home office at this hour, or perhaps he had already gone to sleep. Thinking of his handsome face, his warm smile, and his strong arms, a sweet sensation softly crept into my weary heart. 10 years. We had spent 10 years together. Back when I was a fresh college graduate and an awkward new employee at the company my father ran, he was already a highly competent sales team manager. Our love culminated in a happy marriage, a story our friends considered a modern-day fairy tale. Daniel was not just a perfect husband, but also the solid right-hand man who shouldered the entire weight of the massive Apex construction group after my father passed away suddenly. To me, he was my entire world, my sky, the only pillar I could lean on. The car pulled up to the familiar wrought iron gates. With a faint smile, I paid the driver and, careful not to make a sound, opened the gate. The entire mansion was submerged in darkness, save for a dim, warm light filtering from the living room. My mother, Evelyn, was probably asleep. She had a habit of always leaving a light on for anyone coming home late. Our master bedroom on the second floor was completely dark. My heart, which had been brimming with anticipation, felt a little disappointed. He must be fast asleep, I thought. I cautiously walked up the hardwood stairs, my heart pounding with excitement. My plan was to sneak into the room, hug him from behind, and wake him up with a surprise kiss. But just as my hand touched the cold doorknob of the bedroom, a strange unease washed over me. The door wasn't fully closed. Through the crack, sounds were leaking out from inside, sounds I could never forget. They weren't Daniel's rhythmic snores. They were muffled moans, harsh breaths, heavy with lust, and the explicit, unmistakable sound of skin slapping against skin. Disgust. My heart felt as if an invisible hand was squeezing it, and the blood in my veins seemed to freeze. I began to tremble, not from the cold, but because a horrifying truth like some hideous monster was slowly revealing itself through that narrow crack. The dim light of a bedside lamp illuminated our king-sized bed. And right there in the very bed where I slept every night on the white silk sheets I had personally chosen, two bodies were deeply intertwined. Though I could only see his back, the familiar, robust build of the man belonged to my husband Daniel, and the woman lying beneath him, her long hair spread wildly across the pillows, was none other than Mia. The 20-year-old girl I had brought in from a domestic staffing agency, the one I cared for, as if she were my own little sister. I felt the world collapsing around me, all the air sucked straight out of my lungs. My ears rang with deafening static, and all I could hear was the frantic beating of my own heart pounding like war drums. A pain so intense I felt my heart splitting in two. It was as if thousands of needles were simultaneously stabbing my bleeding heart. The betrayal came from the man I loved most and the young woman I had taken care of with all my soul. Mia's innocent smile, her naive demeanor, and the sweet words of love Daniel whispered to me every morning flashed through my mind like a cruel, ironic, silent film. It was a clumsy stage play, and I was the only fool who hadn't realized I was the punchline. Jealousy and rage erupted inside me like a volcano. I wanted to storm in, I wanted to scream, I wanted to tear those two despicable creatures apart. My hands clenched into tight fists, my nails digging into my palms until they bled. I was on the verge of losing complete control. I had to catch them red-handed and show the whole world their true faces. But just as I raised my foot to kick the door open, a surprisingly warm yet firm hand grabbed my wrist and pulled me back. I spun around, startled. It was my mother. How long had Evelyn been standing there, dressed in her silk nightgown? My mother's normally gentle face looked chillingly calm under the dim light. Her eyes weren't looking at me. They were fixed deeply on the crack of the door where the sordid scene continued. In her gaze, instead of surprise or the agonizing pain I was feeling, I saw a coldness as sharp and cutting as a razor blade. She brought her index finger to her lips, signaling me to stay quiet, and then leaned close to my ear. Her voice was a mere whisper, but every word was clear and unwavering like an absolute command. Calm down. I already knew everything. Don't make a scene right now. Come with me to my room. Tomorrow I have a very entertaining show to put on for you." Her words were like a bucket of ice water dumped over my maddened brain. An entertaining show. In this boiling moment with my heart shattered into a million pieces, how could my mother be thinking about an entertaining show? But her hand gripped mine tightly, transmitting a silent strength that forced me to obey. She led me silently away from that hallway of sin while the obscene noises continued to echo behind my back. Every step was a stab to my soul. That night, lying in bed in my mother's room, I stared blankly at the ceiling. She didn't say another word. She simply brewed me a cup of chamomile tea and sat by my side. Her warm hand gently stroked my hair, but my mind was absolute hell. What was this show she was talking about? Why was she so calm? And would I be strong enough to play the role of the ignorant wife until the curtain on this dark secret finally fell? Dear listeners, the betrayal of the person you share a bed with is perhaps the greatest pain a woman can experience. But sometimes behind the tragedy, another story begins, a story of hidden strength, wisdom, and a revenge, calculated down to the smallest detail. Where will this story take us? What is the nature of the entertaining show the mother has promised? If you like our protagonist are curious and your heart is beating fast, please hit the like button and share your feelings in the comments. And most importantly, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next twists in this dramatic story. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts, and let's continue. The night passed in an eerie silence. The sound of the rain outside had subsided, leaving only the rhythmic dripping of water from the eaves onto the patio tiles. It sounded like a ticking clock counting down to doomsday. I couldn't sleep a wink. My body was exhausted, my mind a foggy mess, but my eyes remained wide open, staring into the void. The sickening image I had seen in my marital bed kept replaying in my head like an endless torture loop. Every time it resurfaced, an invisible knife twisted deeper into my once intact heart, widening the wound. I tried to take deep breaths to regain some composure, but the air in my chest felt thick, painfully lodged in my throat, as if someone were strangling me. My mother, Evelyn, remained seated by the bed. Without saying a word, she just held my cold hand. The warmth of her touch wasn't enough to thaw my frozen soul, but it was like a lifeline keeping me from sinking completely into the abyss of madness and despair. I already knew everything. Her words echoed in my mind. Since when did she know? How many times had she witnessed this scene? Why had she kept quiet? Thousands of questions assaulted my brain, and the initial blinding pain gradually morphed into a confusing, creeping fear. My mother's absolute calm terrified me. The entertaining show she had promised terrified me. Finally, dawn arrived. It wasn't bright and warm, but gray and gloomy, perfectly matching my heart. The faint light filtering through the curtains illuminated my tired, haggard face in the mirror. My eyes were puffy and ringed with dark circles. I looked miserable, like someone who had lost a war she didn't even know she was fighting in. Get up, wash your face, and come down for breakfast. You have to act as if absolutely nothing happened. Understood. My mother's voice came from the doorway. It was still soft, but with a firmness that left no room for argument. Act as if nothing happened. How could I act as if nothing happened? How could I sit across from the man who had driven a lethal knife into my back? How could I face the person who had turned me into the most pitiful fool in the world? I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear this house apart, to run away from this home tainted with lies. But seeing the look in my mother's eyes, a severe gaze that masked a profound shared pain, I couldn't say a word. I bit my lip until I tasted blood and nodded expressionlessly. I walked down to the dining room like a soulless corpse. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and buttered toast, familiar fragrances that used to make me happy every morning, now made me nauseous. Daniel was already seated at the table, still in his high-end silk pajamas, his hair perfectly styled. He looked up when he saw me and flashed a radiant smile. That same smile that had once mesmerized me now repulsed me to my very bones. "When did you get in? You didn't even call. Was the business trip that rough?" He stood up to hug me. His voice was affectionate and tender, as if absolutely nothing was wrong. I went completely rigid in his arms. His familiar cologne mixed with the faint, lingering scent of another woman. That smell, still clinging to his body, assaulted my senses and turned my stomach. I fought back the urge to gag and forced a smile. "I wanted to surprise you. I got in really late and didn't want to wake you. I figured you were already asleep." Every single word I spoke felt like a briar scraping against my throat. Act. I had to act. I had to play the role of the happy, oblivious wife. Was this the opening scene of my mother's play? You really did surprise me. "I missed you so much," he whispered in my ear before kissing my forehead. A cold, filthy kiss. I shuddered and gently pushed him away. "I'm going to go wash up a bit more." The flight really took it out of me. I made up an excuse to escape his hypocritical embrace and hurried to the powder room. I turned the cold water on full blast. Cupping my hands, I splashed the freezing water onto my face repeatedly. I wanted to wash away that dirty feeling. I wanted to clear my head. Looking in the mirror, I saw a complete stranger, a woman with eyes full of hatred and agony. "You have to do this," I told myself. "You have to play this role perfectly." When I returned to the table, Mia walked in carrying a plate of freshly fried eggs and bacon, dressed in her immaculate housekeeper uniform, her hair tied back in a neat braid that gave her an air of total innocence. She gave a slight nod and said softly, "Ma'am, you're back. Please eat while it's hot." She still looked shy and naive, but now beneath that facade I saw a viper mocking my stupidity. I noticed a faint red mark still visible on her neck, a leftover trace of their frantic night. The rage flared up again. I wanted to flip the table to throw the hot eggs right in her face, but a sharp glance from my mother across the table stopped me in my tracks. It was a cold look of warning. I took a deep breath and forcibly swallowed the bitter lump in my throat. "Thank you." "Looks great," I said, my voice so remarkably serene that even I was surprised. And so began the most horrific breakfast of my entire life. Daniel kept playing the exemplary husband. He served me food, asked about my meetings in New York, and told unfunny jokes. Mia stood off to the side, pouring coffee, occasionally shooting Daniel a furtive glance, a loaded, meaningful look that I would have never noticed before. And my mother, so calm and collected, enjoyed her breakfast, chiming in occasionally with trivial conversation. The three of them, the traitor, the homewrecker, and the mysterious mother, were putting on a flawless theatrical performance. I was the only forced spectator, the victim, who was also required to play a part in my own tragedy. I couldn't eat a single bite. Everything tasted like ash. I only managed to sip some orange juice, trying not to let them notice my erratic behavior. "What's wrong? You look really pale." "Do you want me to call a doctor?" Daniel asked, feigning deep concern once again. "I'm fine, honey. Just jet lag and exhaustion. I'll go upstairs to rest for a bit and I'll be fine." I couldn't take it anymore and stood up abruptly. "Mia, make Natalie a cup of ginger honey tea and take it up to her room," my mother suddenly instructed. Her voice remained perfectly even. Mia responded with a docile, "Yes, ma'am." I looked at my mother, completely confused by her intentions. Why Mia? Why ask her to bring the tea to my room? Wasn't that just giving her and Daniel another chance to be alone? But I didn't dare ask. I simply walked up to the second floor in silence, my heart heavy with sorrow, doubt, and fear. As soon as the bedroom door clicked shut behind me, I nearly collapsed. This room, which had once been my happy sanctuary, now felt like every piece of furniture was mocking me. The king-size bed, the walk-in closet, the vanity, everything was a witness to a lie. I sank to the floor, buried my face in my hands, and tried to organize my chaotic thoughts. What exactly was my mother's play? Why was she making me endure this torture? Wasn't my silence just condoning their sins, making them even more arrogant? And did this entertaining show actually exist, or was it just a comforting lie to calm me down so I wouldn't ruin everything? The door creaked open. It was Mia. She walked in carrying a tray with the ginger tea, still wearing her submissive expression. But the second the door closed behind her, the smile on her face twisted into something bizarre. There was a hint of defiance and sheer smugness. She set the tea on the bedside table and, as if by accident, spilled a generous splash of the hot liquid right onto the silk pajamas I was wearing. "Oh, I'm so sorry, ma'am. I'm so clumsy." She apologized repeatedly, but there wasn't a single trace of regret in her eyes. I knew she had done it on purpose to provoke me. I clenched my fists, but then my mother's voice echoed in my head. "Calm down." I took a deep breath and forced a smile that felt more like a grimace. "Don't worry about it, Mia. It's just a little water." But there was something else she didn't know I saw. In that very moment, I caught sight of a detail she had deliberately left exposed. On her wrist, she was wearing a silver bracelet with a 4-leaf clover charm. That was the exact bracelet Daniel had told me he bought as my birthday present last month, but claimed he had lost during a business trip. Everything became blindingly clear. My mother didn't just know, she seemed to have anticipated all of this. And this play might be a far more complex and terrifying master plan than I had ever imagined. The ginger tea was still steaming on the table, but I couldn't drink it. Its taste, the spicy bite of ginger mixed with the cloying sweetness of honey, was exactly like my marriage, seemingly warm and sweet on the outside, but hiding a bitterly cruel lie underneath. Mia left the room, leaving me alone with my stained silk pajamas and my shattered heart. The silver clover bracelet gleaming on her wrist kept flashing in my mind. It was a glaring, cruel proof of Daniel's betrayal. He hadn't just given her his body. He had given her the gifts and the lies that were supposed to be mine. I slumped against the side of the bed, sitting on the plush wool rug. The chill of the floor seeped through my clothes and into my skin. This room, once my refuge, the place I felt safest, had now become an invisible prison, locking me in with the memories of a fake happiness. I closed my eyes and the memories rushed in like an unstoppable flood. 10 years ago, I was Natalie, the only daughter of the CEO of Apex Construction. A girl who had grown up wrapped in cotton wool, who had never experienced the real hardships of life. Back then, my world was filled with books, friends, and dreamy architectural sketches. I met Daniel at the company's annual holiday gala. At the time, he was a young, rising sales manager who had climbed the ladder purely on his own talent, without connections or wealthy backers. He was different from the idle trust fund kids who usually surrounded me. He had a refined appearance, a confident demeanor, and above all, intelligent eyes that hid a fierce ambition and determination. He didn't approach me with cliché pickup lines. Instead, he talked to me about world-famous skyscrapers and the architectural philosophies that fascinated me. He saw me as a woman who loved art and design, not just the boss's daughter. My naive heart was swayed from our very first conversation. Daniel courted me with perseverance and incredible delicacy. He didn't buy me expensive jewelry. He tracked down rare, out-of-print architectural books. We spent afternoons wandering downtown Chicago, admiring historical buildings and staying up all night sketching outlandish floor plans. I was captivated by his intelligence, his deep understanding of me, and a love that felt so incredibly sincere. My father, a man who had spent his entire life swimming with sharks in the corporate world, was initially hesitant. He had an excellent eye for judging character. He saw a flame of ambition in Daniel's eyes that he thought burned a little too bright. Natalie, Daniel is a capable man, very capable. But men who are too capable and too ambitious often do not make good husbands. Think about this carefully. He told me one afternoon while we were having tea on the patio. But at that moment, I was entirely blinded by love. I argued with my father, accused him of being overly suspicious, and swore that Daniel was the greatest man in the world. Seeing his daughter's unwavering determination, my father finally relented. He sighed and said something whose true meaning I only fully understood now. Well, I just hope my judgment of character is wrong this time. Our wedding was a grand affair that caught the attention of Chicago's entire business elite. Daniel went from being a regular mid-level manager to becoming the son-in-law of the CEO of Apex Construction overnight. And he worked incredibly hard. He poured his heart and soul into the company. He helped my father secure massive contracts and expand into new markets, taking Apex Construction to unprecedented heights. Slowly but surely, my father began to trust him, promoting him to increasingly important roles. Everyone praised me for my great eye for finding a highly competent husband who adored his wife. I lived in that bubble of pride and happiness for many years. Then, 2 years ago, my father passed away from a sudden, massive heart attack. It was the greatest blow of my life. I felt my entire world collapsing, and it was Daniel who stood by my side through those pitch-black days. He handled the funeral arrangements, kept me on my feet, and most importantly, he threw the entire weight of the destabilized company onto his own shoulders. I gave him my absolute trust. I named him executive vice president so he could handle all corporate matters on my behalf. I truly believed that while heaven had cruelly taken my beloved father away, it had left me a wonderful husband to protect me. But I was so terribly wrong. Mom, why were you so calm? Since when did you know about this? I asked, my voice breaking. Later that day, when Evelyn came to check on me, she didn't answer right away. She poured some of her own tea into a cup, the thin steam rising with the clear scent of chamomile. She sighed deeply, a sigh heavy with countless untold emotions. I started getting suspicious about a year ago, she spoke slowly. After your father died, Daniel changed. He kept pretending to dote on you and care for me, but a woman my age has a very sharp sixth sense. I noticed him taking phone calls in secret, and suddenly having urgent weekend meetings. There were also shady expenses. He claimed they were for entertaining clients, but your father always ran the business with a clean ledger. There were never sketchy expenses like that when he was alive. And why didn't you tell me? I nearly shouted. If you had told me sooner, I wouldn't have been played for such a fool. My mother shook her head, her gaze filled with a sorrow that broke my heart. Would you have believed me if I told you? At the time, you viewed him as your entire world, the savior of our family. If I had brought it up, you would have thought I was just a paranoid, jealous mother-in-law trying to sabotage your happiness. Besides, back then I had no hard evidence. Just gut feelings. I couldn't act recklessly. I was left speechless. She was right. The Natalie from a year ago would have never believed her. I had been too stupid, too trusting. And what about Mia? I asked, my voice trembling. That girl. My mother said, taking a sip of her tea, her eyes narrowing. She showed up 6 months ago. It was Daniel who subtly suggested you hire her from the agency. He fed you that story about her being from a small town, sweet and simple. From day one, I felt something was off. She always kept her eyes lowered, but sometimes she looked at Daniel in a very bizarre, hungry way. But I watched in silence. I wanted to see exactly what they were plotting. She set her cup down and took both my hands in hers. Natalie, do you know why I stopped you last night? If you had caused a scene, you would have only gained a few minutes of momentary satisfaction. Daniel would have denied everything. He would have blamed it all on Mia, saying she seduced him. Then he would have dropped to his knees, begged for your forgiveness, and sworn eternal love. Knowing your soft heart, you would have caved and forgiven him. And then, everything would have just continued, only they would have been much more discreet and cunning about it. You would have completely lost your only advantage, the element of surprise. Every word my mother spoke was a hammer smashing the last ounce of innocence I had left. She had seen it all, Daniel's true face, and even my own pathetic weakness. So what do we do now, Mom? I asked, utterly helpless. Now my mother smiled, a mysterious and authoritative smirk. Now you wipe your tears. You get up and you learn how to act. You have to pretend you love him more than ever, that you trust him implicitly. Let that viper fall into a deep, comfortable sleep in her own smugness. Make him believe he has you completely under his control. And when he is at his most careless, that is when we strike the final blow. She stood up, walked over to the window, and looked out at the manicured green lawn. Your father didn't just leave us a massive fortune, he left us wisdom and courage. The time has come for you to learn how to use them. Daniel doesn't just want you out of the picture. He wants the entirety of Apex Construction. In this play, my dear, we cannot afford to lose. Her words sent a shiver down my spine, but simultaneously ignited a fire deep in my belly, a roaring flame of hatred and absolute determination. I wasn't going to break. I was going to fight. Not just for myself, but for my father's legacy. Dear listeners, every like you give serves as encouragement for us to bring you this story in the most thrilling way possible. Let's continue. The following days were a succession of the most agonizing psychological torture I had ever experienced. Every morning when I woke up, I had to force myself to smile and whisper sweet nothings to the enemy lying next to me. At every meal, I had to pretend I was enjoying food prepared by the hands of my rival. Every night, I had to invent all sorts of excuses, exhaustion, a headache, my period, to avoid any physical contact with Daniel. Every single minute, every second, living under the same roof as those two was pure agony. But my mother's words echoed in my ears like a sacred mantra, keeping me sane. Calm down. Play your part perfectly. Make him trust you completely. I learned to hide my blazing hatred behind a sweet smile, to bury my crushing pain under gentle words. I became an actress against my will, and the stage was my own home. The only spectator who knew the truth was my mother, the silent director of this macabre play. Daniel didn't suspect a thing. In fact, since my return from the business trip, I became even more affectionate and clingy, which made his ego swell to massive proportions. He thought I was just a naive canary in a gilded cage, completely incapable of surviving without him. That smugness was clearly reflected in his eyes and in everything he did. He began showing interest in Mia more openly right in front of me, always under the guise of being a generous, caring employer, of course. Mia looks a bit too thin lately. Tell her to make sure she's eating enough, or those clothes she wears are getting worn out. Why don't you take her shopping this weekend and buy her something nice? He said these things with such natural ease, and I had to agree enthusiastically. Of course, honey, I'll take care of it. Mia is practically family. She's like a little sister to me. Every time I uttered those words, I felt like I was twisting a blade into my own ribs. But I knew that the more generous I appeared, the more Daniel would lower his guard. One afternoon, while my mother and I were watching television in the living room, Daniel came home looking incredibly upbeat. He hugged me tightly and bragged that he had just closed a massive contract that would bring substantial profits to the company. "It's all thanks to having your support by my side. You're my lucky charm," he said in a voice dripping with saccharine sweetness. I smiled and congratulated him, but my heart was dead and freezing. I knew perfectly well that out of that contract and those profits, only a fraction would actually go to the company, while the lion's share would disappear into his personal offshore accounts. After Daniel went upstairs to shower, my mother silently muted the television and turned to me. Her voice was low and serious. "Natalie, I think it's time you knew the full extent of my plan." She led me into my father's old study. The room had been preserved exactly as it was when he was alive. Floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookshelves, a massive polished desk, and the familiar comforting smell of old paper and leather. My mother locked the door, a gesture that proved the immense gravity of the situation. "I don't just suspect he's cheating on you," she began, her gaze so piercing it felt like it could slice through steel. "I suspect he's orchestrating a massive conspiracy to completely take over Apex Construction." I froze. I had vaguely intuited this, but hearing it stated plainly by my mother was still a profound shock. "Right after your father died, I knew that the two of us, two women, would have a hard time defending this empire against a cunning wolf like him, so I did something in secret." My mother walked over to the bookshelf and pressed the spine of a specific hollowed-out book. A small hidden drawer slid open. From inside, she pulled out a USB flash drive and a thin manila folder. "These are the weekly reports from Mr. Jenkins," she stated. "Mr. Jenkins, the director of accounting." I was stunned. Mr. Jenkins was a quiet, middle-aged man who had worked for my father for over 20 years. I had never paid much attention to him. "Exactly," my mother nodded. "Mr. Jenkins is absolutely fiercely loyal to your father's memory. Before he died, your father asked him that if anything ever happened, he should help us keep a close eye on Daniel. He has been my eyes and ears inside the corporate office for the past 2 years." My mother plugged the USB into the laptop on the desk, and the screen populated with complex spreadsheets and endless rows of numbers. "Daniel is incredibly cunning. He doesn't embezzle small, noticeable amounts. He uses highly sophisticated methods. He's created a web of shell companies registered under the names of his distant relatives and associates. Through these ghost companies, he signs vendor contracts with Apex Construction, inflating the prices of raw materials and fabricating fake consulting expenses. The entire margin of difference is funneled straight into his pockets. He is bleeding the company dry, drop by drop. I fear that if we don't act soon, it will be too late." Every word my mother said hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't believe it. How could the man I trusted with my life do something so utterly despicable? He hadn't just betrayed my heart. He was systematically destroying my father's life's work. "Then why don't we expose him right now? With this proof, we can take him to the FBI," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "No," my mother shook her head firmly. "He's too careful. All of these final contracts are co-signed by you, as the acting CEO and board chair. If we go to court right now, the primary person legally responsible will be you. He'll throw all the blame onto you, claiming he was just executing your executive orders. Furthermore, this circumstantial evidence isn't bulletproof yet. We need a definitive strike. Irrefutable proof." She looked at me, her eyes calculating and cold. "And that is your mission. From now on, you don't just pretend to love him. You must pretend to have absolute blind faith in his business acumen. You need to encourage him to take on bigger projects, give him more unchecked power. Let him get drunk on his own success until his greed grows so massive it becomes uncontrollable. A snake only strikes when threatened, but if it eats a prey too large, it will die from a ruptured stomach." I understood her plan. It was incredibly ruthless and highly dangerous. She was weaponizing Daniel's own greed to destroy him, but it also meant I would be putting my father's company at even greater catastrophic risk. But if we do that, the company will be in massive jeopardy. "What if he steals everything and skips the country?" I asked, terrified. My mother smiled, a smile brimming with dark confidence. "Don't worry, I have my methods. Every single move he makes is in the palm of my hand. He's not going anywhere." She handed me a small silver key. "This is the key to his private home office down the hall. Your father gave him that room so he could work comfortably from home, but I secretly had a copy made. Daniel believes that room is his absolute private sanctuary, the place where he hides his dirtiest secrets. I want you to go into that room late one night when he is fast asleep or out of town. I am confident you will find the silver bullet we need." I took the key with trembling fingers. The metal was cold, but it felt like it was burning my palm like a branding iron. I knew that the moment I slipped this key into the lock, I wouldn't just be opening a door. I'd be opening Pandora's box, unleashing the most horrifying secrets of the man I once called my husband. Would I have the courage to face what was coming? And what exactly did my mother expect me to find? The silver key rested heavy in my hand, feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. It was the final gateway to the truth. Whenever I looked at it, my heart raced with a sickening mix of dread and morbid compulsion, dread of facing something worse than physical infidelity, but a compulsion to tear the mask completely off the monster I had loved. I waited. I waited for the perfect opportunity. My mother's plan required absolute monk-like patience. I continued playing the blind, doting wife, throwing my full support behind my husband's career. I praised his business proposals, marveled at his genius, and even proactively suggested he lead larger acquisitions. "You're just so brilliant, honey. I don't know where the company would be without you. Why don't you take the lead on the new downtown high-rise development? I trust you entirely," I would tell him with a sugary smile while an ocean of acid churned in my stomach. Daniel, exactly as my mother predicted, was utterly blinded by his own hubris. He became intoxicated by his unchecked power and my blind faith. He grew increasingly busy late-night meetings, sudden urgent trips. He no longer kept his guard up around me. He genuinely believed I was entirely in the palm of his hand. And that was when my opportunity finally arrived. One Friday evening, he announced he had to fly to Denver to meet a crucial client and would likely spend the night there. Before leaving, he hugged me, putting on a touching display of spousal affection. I hugged him back tightly, smiling, and whispered, "Have a safe flight. I'll be waiting for you." But the second the taillights of his luxury SUV disappeared beyond the estate gates, the smile vanished from my face, replaced by a mask of cold determination. Tonight was the night. I waited until nearly midnight. When the massive house was dead silent, when both my mother and Mia were fast asleep, I crept out of my bedroom. My pulse pounded in my ears. The hallway was pitch black, illuminated only by the pale moonlight spilling through the large skylights. Every step I took on the hardwood floor seemed to echo like a gunshot, making me flinch. I stopped in front of Daniel's study, a heavy oak door that symbolized his authority and his impenetrable privacy. With a shaking hand, I pulled the silver key from the pocket of my robe. My palms were slick with sweat. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and slowly slid the key into the lock. A sharp click echoed in the silence. The door unlatched, and a draft of cool air wafted out, carrying Daniel's signature cologne, mixed with the scent of printer ink. I slipped through the crack and shut the door silently behind me. I didn't dare turn on the overhead lights. I only used the dim flashlight from my smartphone. The room materialized before me, luxurious and impeccably neat. A massive executive desk, built-in bookshelves, a pricey leather sofa. Everything was perfectly arranged, reflecting its owner's refined tastes. But I knew that behind this polished veneer lay a den of absolute rot. I began to search. I didn't even know exactly what I was looking for. My mother had only said I would find what we need. I rifled through the desk drawers, flipped through manila folders. It was all standard corporate paperwork, spreadsheets, vendor contracts. Nothing glaringly illegal. I tried his laptop, but it was locked behind a complex biometric password. Time was ticking, and my panic was rising. What if his flight was canceled? What if he came back early? I scanned the room desperately until my eyes locked onto an oil painting hanging on the far wall, an abstract landscape he was strangely protective of. Something looked off. The heavy frame was tilted slightly off-center from its usual perfect alignment. Driven by pure instinct, I approached it and carefully swung the frame outward. My heart stopped. Behind the painting was a small steel wall safe. It was painted the exact same color as the drywall, making it practically invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. I found it. This has to be it. But I immediately hit a brick wall. What was the passcode? I tried. His birthday, our wedding anniversary, the year the company was founded. Nothing worked. The damn keypad just beeped an angry, indifferent red. I was about to give up in despair when a tiny detail clicked in my brain. Daniel was weirdly superstitious. He believed heavily in numerology and lucky numbers. The number he always claimed brought him supreme wealth was 888. With shaking fingers, I punched in 8888. A mechanical whir sounded and the heavy steel door clicked open. Inside, there wasn't stacks of cash or gold bars. There were several thick ledgers, a black leather-bound journal, and a smartphone. An iPhone, a newer model, completely different from the one he normally used. I grabbed the phone. My hands were shaking so violently I almost dropped it. It wasn't passcode protected. I swiped up, and the screen illuminated. The lock screen wallpaper was an image that would be burned into my retinas forever. It was a selfie of Daniel and Mia. They were hugging on a sun-drenched beach, smiling radiantly. Mia was in a skimpy bikini, and Daniel was shirtless. They looked like a genuine wealthy couple on a romantic getaway. It was clearly taken during one of his urgent business trips. The pain and fury surged again, but I bit the inside of my cheek hard. Now was not the time for petty jealousy. I quickly opened the iMessage app, and what I read next was 1,000 times more horrifying than the infidelity. Hundreds, thousands of sickeningly sweet texts between Daniel and Mia. They called each other hubby and wifey. They talked about their future, their concrete plans to drain the company dry and then flee to a non-extradition country to start a new life. I just need that stupid bitch to sign the final power of attorney for the island project and it's game over. Then her family's entire fortune is ours. I'll file for divorce and we'll get married. You won't be a maid anymore, baby. You'll be the CEO's wife, read one text from Daniel to Mia. My vision blurred with red-hot rage. That stupid bitch. That's what he called me. But the descent into hell didn't stop there. I scrolled down and saw an encrypted chat thread with an unsaved number, labeled only as Mr. X. The contents of this conversation chilled me to the marrow of my bones. They weren't just discussing corporate embezzlement, they were discussing murder. If the wife or the old lady start asking too many questions, take care of them like we did the last time. A brake failure, a car accident. Nobody will ask questions, read a message from Mr. X. My heart literally skipped a beat. They were planning to kill me and my mother. This was no longer a simple case of adultery or white-collar fraud. This was a premeditated, cold-blooded murder conspiracy. I was shaking so badly the phone slipped from my grasp and clattered onto the carpet. Who was Mr. X? Who could be so monstrous? And the husband I had loved with all my heart, Daniel, was a ruthless, sociopathic killer. I scrambled to pick the phone back up. Working on pure adrenaline, I took screenshots of every single incriminating message, airdropped them to my own device, and forwarded them to a secure, encrypted email address I had set up earlier that week. I also grabbed the black leather journal. Thumbing through it, I saw detailed, handwritten logs of offshore accounts, shell company routing numbers, and a list of politicians and inspectors they had bribed. I knew this was the silver bullet my mother wanted me to find, but the price of finding it was astronomically high. It utterly annihilated the last microscopic shred of illusion I held for this man. In my eyes, he was no longer my cheating husband. He was a murderer, and I was sleeping next to a demon. I had to get out of there. I had to protect my mother at all costs. I wiped down the safe, locked it, straightened the painting, and snuck back to my room in a state of clinical shock. My entire body was freezing cold, as if I had just waded through a morgue. The things I had seen danced before my eyes, morphing into a terrifying monster threatening to devour my family. Take care of them like we did the last time. Those words from Mr. X tore a gash in my sanity that would never heal. My father had died of a sudden heart attack. But was it really a heart attack? Or was that the last time they were talking about? A horrifying thought crossed my mind, and I almost choked on my own breath. No, it couldn't be. As greedy as Daniel was, he couldn't be that evil, could he? He owed my father everything. My father had made him who he was. I tried to banish the insane thought, but the seed of absolute terror was planted, taking root deep in my shattered soul. I hid the evidence in the most secure place I could think of, the false bottom of an old jewelry box I hadn't opened since high school. Then I sat on the edge of my bed, staring into the dark. I functioned like a pre-programmed robot now. Logic screamed at me to maintain my cover, to stick to my mother's plan. But my heart was dead. The next morning, Daniel returned from Denver, still wearing his charming smile, still dripping with sweet words. He handed me a gorgeous silk scarf, a gift he claimed he bought at a high-end boutique in Aspen. I accepted it, smiled brightly, and thanked him, but inside I was screaming. Was this scarf bought with blood money stolen from my father's legacy, or was it a frantic airport purchase to cover up a weekend of debauchery with that maid I didn't want to know? I no longer cared. All I knew was that I had to act. And I discovered something dark about myself. When a person falls into the absolute abyss of trauma, they become strangely, terrifyingly calm. I played my part brilliantly. I acted thrilled with the gift. I asked about his meetings. I even gave him a playful, adorable pout. "Honey, I bet all the beautiful girls out west were staring at you, weren't they?" He laughed loudly, pulling me into his chest. "Are you kidding? Where am I going to find anyone more beautiful and perfect than my wife?" That bald-faced lie would have once sent my heart fluttering. Now it just made me want to carve his eyes out. But I wasn't the only one acting. Following Daniel's return, the young housekeeper Mia grew increasingly bold and arrogant. She knew Daniel was obsessed with her. She knew her position in this house was cementing. She dropped her timid, submissive act entirely when we were alone. She began making snide remarks and subtly provoking me. She accidentally shattered an antique vase my father had bought me. She poured way too much salt into my favorite soup. She even began lounging around the house in one of my expensive cashmere robes when Daniel was out acting like she was already the lady of the manor. Every single thing she did was a glaring provocation. One morning while I was working on my laptop in the dining room, she brought me a fresh cup of coffee. Instead of setting it on the table, she held it out for me to take. Just as my fingers brushed the porcelain, she deliberately let go. The scalding black coffee tipped forward, splashing directly onto my MacBook and a stack of critical financial documents. "Oh, I'm so sorry, ma'am." My hand just slipped, she gasped, feigning horror, but the sickening smirk on her lips was painfully obvious. The laptop hissed, sparked, and went completely dead. All my current workflow was on that machine. The nuclear rage inside me finally detonated. I stood up, raising my hand, fully prepared to slap the smug look right off her face. But at that exact second, Daniel came jogging down the stairs. Seeing the scene, he rushed over not to check if his wife had been burned by scalding liquid, but to grab Mia, who was now putting on an Oscar-worthy performance of a terrified, bullied servant. "Are you okay? Did you burn yourself?" he asked her urgently, completely ignoring me. Then he turned to me, his tone laced with sharp reprimand. "Natalie, what did you do to scare the poor girl like that? It was just an accident. I was paralyzed." My husband was openly defending his mistress right in front of me, having the absolute audacity to blame me. I looked at him and then at Mia, who was cowering against his chest like a wounded bird. A flawless theatrical performance. I took a deep breath, swallowing the acid in my throat. I forced a smile that felt psychotic. "I'm fine, honey. It's just a computer." I probably snapped at her too harshly and startled her. "Don't worry about it, Mia. Just be more careful next time," I said breezily, as if nothing mattered. Daniel and Mia both looked stunned. They hadn't expected me to be so placid and forgiving. Daniel looked relieved while Mia shot me a look of deep suspicion. That night, I recounted the entire incident to my mother. She listened quietly, then nodded. "Well done. Very well done. Let her be arrogant. The more arrogant a person gets, the more fatal mistakes they make. And don't worry about the laptop. I've been secretly backing up all your files to an external hard drive every night." My jaw dropped. It turned out everything was already factored into my mother's calculations. She was like a grandmaster chess player, always 5 moves ahead of her opponent, watching in absolute silence, waiting for the perfect moment to call checkmate. "But Mom, I don't think I can take much more of this," I confessed, my voice breaking with exhaustion. "Every day is absolute torture." My mother pulled me into a tight embrace. "Stay strong, my girl. The curtain is going to fall very soon. I promise you. The pain they have forced us to endure, I will make them repay it 100,000 times over." Her words injected steel into my spine. I knew I wasn't fighting this war alone. Daniel and Mia's master plan began to rapidly accelerate. Daniel started aggressively pitching me on a massive new venture, a multi-billion-dollar luxury resort complex in Maui, Hawaii. He painted a breathtaking future filled with astronomical profit margins. He claimed it was a once-in-a-lifetime golden ticket that would catapult Apex Construction to global dominance. And then he dropped the hammer. He asked me to sign a blanket power of attorney as the acting CEO, delegating complete, unquestioned authority to him for all matters regarding the Maui project, from securing financing and signing vendor contracts to transferring massive sums of corporate land equity. I knew immediately that this was the final trap. This was the legal mechanism he needed to completely siphon the remaining liquidity out of my father's company. If I signed it, I would be willingly handing him the keys to the entire empire. But I also knew this was the exact final blow my mother had been waiting for. What was I supposed to do? Sign it or refuse? This single decision wouldn't just determine the fate of a multi-million-dollar corporation, it would determine whether we lived or died. If I signed it, would my mother's countertrap actually work? Or were we betting everything on a losing hand? Dear listeners, faced with a life-or-death decision, will Natalie have the courage to bet it all on her mother's plan? Just how far will the greed of a cheating husband and a manipulative maid take them? If you find this story thrilling, please share it with your friends. Stay with us to witness the explosive climax. The atmosphere in my father's old study was thick with tension. The massive binder detailing the Maui resort project that Daniel had just pitched sat dead center on the mahogany desk. The projected revenue numbers printed on the glossy pages seemed to mock my intelligence. He had painted such a flawless illusion, a venture so sweet any venture capitalist would kill for it. But I knew the truth beneath that glittering facade was a bottomless sinkhole designed to swallow my father's legacy whole. I looked at my mother, desperately searching her eyes for a signal. She remained entirely placid. She slowly flipped through the pages of the proposal, then nodded with a look of profound satisfaction. This prospectus is outstanding, Daniel. I can see that since Arthur's passing, you have truly matured into a visionary capable of carrying this entire empire on your shoulders. I am so incredibly proud of you. Hearing this, Daniel puffed his chest out, practically glowing with smugness. Thank you, Evelyn. It's only possible because you and Natalie have placed your unwavering trust in me. I promise I will repay that trust tenfold, he said, his voice dripping with practiced sincerity. I felt physically sick, but I forced a hesitant smile. I agree the potential is massive, Daniel, but I'm just a little nervous about the sheer scale of the capital investment and signing over blanket executive authority to you. I feigned hesitation on purpose, testing his reaction and making my performance more believable. Daniel immediately reached out and grabbed my hands. His eyes widened in a pitch-perfect display of pleading devotion. Natalie, do you still not trust me? Every single hour I work is for our future, for the legacy of this family. Just trust me this one last time. I promise you I will turn Apex Construction into the undisputed king of real estate in the country. He was such a phenomenal actor. If I hadn't already seen the monster lurking beneath his skin, I would have melted at those sweet words. I shot a glance at my mother. She gave a microscopic nod. A barely imperceptible yet definitive green light. The time had come to pull the trigger. Okay, I said, my voice firming up. I trust you, Daniel. I'll sign the power of attorney. Daniel was so ecstatic he practically leaped out of his chair. He pulled me into a crushing hug and kissed me passionately on the cheek. Thank you, baby. I swear to God you will never regret this decision. Oh, I won't, I thought, but you certainly will. Later that night, after Daniel, drunk on his impending victory, had fallen into a deep sleep, my mother and I convened back in the study. The mask of calm had vanished from Evelyn's face. She paced back and forth across the Persian rug, her brow furrowed in deep concentration. Mom, is this really going to work? I'm terrified. What if he outsmarts us? I whispered frantically. My mother stopped pacing and gripped my shoulders tightly. Natalie, breathe. Everything is falling into place. Daniel thinks he's the smartest wolf in the forest, but he has no idea we have a tiger fighting on our side. Her eyes glinted with a dangerous light. It is time for you to finally meet with Mr. Lawson. Mr. Lawson. My mother had mentioned his name a few times. He was the chief legal officer of Apex Construction, a thin, quiet man in his late 50s who wore thick glasses and rarely spoke at board meetings. He was a founding member who had worked alongside my father for over 25 years, but he lived a remarkably low-profile life, dedicating himself entirely to the labyrinth of corporate law. I never would have pegged the invisible, soft-spoken Mr. Lawson as the tiger my mother was talking about. The following morning, my mother invited him to the estate. We didn't meet in the bright living room, but locked inside my father's secure study. Mr. Lawson slipped in quietly, carrying his battered vintage leather briefcase. He greeted my mother and me with a deeply respectful nod. Evelyn, Natalie. Arthur, please skip the formalities. Have a seat, my mother said warmly. I asked you here today because we need to ask you for a massive favor. Mr. Lawson sat down, placing his briefcase squarely on the desk. You don't need to ask Evelyn. The debt I owe Arthur, I will carry it to my grave. If you and Natalie need me, I will walk through fire for you. His words moved me deeply. I suddenly remembered that Mr. Lawson had grown up in extreme poverty on the south side of Chicago. It was my father who had spotted his brilliance, paid for his tuition at Northwestern Law, and elevated him to the position of chief legal officer. His loyalty to the Apex family was absolute and incorruptible. My mother laid everything out. She detailed Daniel's infidelity, his embezzlement, and his overarching conspiracy to steal the company. As he listened, Mr. Lawson's usually stoic face contorted with cold fury. His thin hands clenched into fists, the blue veins popping against his pale skin. That ungrateful parasite, Lawson hissed through gritted teeth. Arthur treated him like his own flesh and blood, and he dares to. Now is not the time for anger, Arthur, my mother interrupted calmly. Natalie has signed the power of attorney for the Maui project. Daniel will make his move any day now. We have to strike first. Mr. Lawson unlatched his leather briefcase, but inside there weren't standard legal briefs. There were dozens of thick files stamped with bright red confidential markers. Evelyn, I've seen this day coming for a long time, he said, his voice dropping into a calculating lethal register. For the past 2 years, I haven't just been reviewing vendor contracts. I've been secretly compiling a shadow dossier of every single federal crime Daniel has committed. He began laying out the documents, and what he revealed was far more explosive than what I had found on the burner phone. Daniel hadn't just created shell companies to siphon off Apex funds. He had actively used corporate money to bribe zoning officials, rig municipal bids, and launder illegal campaign contributions. The black leather journal I had found was barely the tip of the iceberg. Those shell companies, they are all legally registered under the names of Mia's relatives, Mr. Lawson continued. That little housekeeper isn't the innocent bystander she plays. She is a highly active co-conspirator acting as the primary mule for Daniel's money laundering operations. And what about Mr. X? I blurted out anxiously. The guy on the phone who said he wanted to kill us, Mr. Lawson looked at me, his expression grave. I still haven't been able to unmask his true identity. He is a ghost. He covers his digital tracks with military-grade encryption, but I have a strong theory. It has to be someone with immense institutional power, a shadow backer pulling Daniel's strings. Daniel is a sociopath, but he's not smart enough to orchestrate a corporate coup of this magnitude alone. His words sent a shiver down my spine. Our enemy wasn't just my cheating husband and a greedy maid. There was an invisible phantom in the room, far more dangerous and utterly ruthless. So, what is the play? I asked, my heart in my throat. Mr. Lawson looked at my mother, then at me. We are going to build a trap so massive he won't be able to see the walls until they crush him. If Daniel wants the Maui project, we will give it to him. But it will be a project that does not legally exist. Mr. Lawson meticulously detailed his strategy. Utilizing his deep connections in the legal and real estate world, he had fabricated a flawless portfolio of counterfeit documents, fake zoning permits, fake environmental clearances, fake land deeds. Daniel would believe the acquisition was proceeding perfectly. Driven by his insatiable greed, Daniel would funnel all the illegal funds he had embezzled and take out massive predatory loans against Apex's assets to personally invest in this ghost project. Once he has liquidated every cent of his stolen capital and reached the point of no return, Mr. Lawson said, his eyes gleaming with a predatory sharpness that is when we detonate the charges. We won't just recover what was stolen. We will bury him and his accomplices under federal indictments so heavy they will never see the sun again. The plan was a stroke of absolute genius, but it was also terrifyingly risky. If we made a single misstep, if Daniel's auditors caught wind of the fake documents, the blowback would be catastrophic. But how do we keep a shark like Daniel from smelling the blood in the water? I asked. My mother smiled her dark smile. That is where your acting skills come back into play, Natalie. You must continue playing the foolish, greedy wife. Pressure him to speed up the Maui acquisition. Act desperate for those massive profit margins. His own greed will blind him. He won't be able to tell what's real from what's fake. I nodded slowly. I was terrified, yes, but I also felt a rush of adrenaline. I was no longer the weak, weeping victim. I was the lead actress in a play designed to annihilate a traitor. Yet the question of Mr. X still haunted me. Who was he? Would he see through our trap? It felt like we were playing chess on a board where half the enemy pieces were invisible. In the days following the meeting with Mr. Lawson, I felt like I was walking a fraying tightrope over a bottomless canyon. Every step had to be perfectly placed. Every smile, every sigh meticulously calculated. My mother and I had officially entered a psychological war of attrition. The stakes were so high that a single slip of the tongue would cost us our empire, and potentially our lives. But strangely, the crippling fear that used to paralyze me had vanished. In its place grew a glacial, terrifying calm. Perhaps because when a person hits the absolute rock bottom of betrayal, they simply have nothing left to lose. I threw myself fully into my role. I feigned obsessive enthusiasm for the Maui project. Every single day, I pestered Daniel about the timelines and funding. Honey, how are we looking on the Hawaiian acquisition? I was reading that commercial real estate prices on the islands are surging. If we don't lock this in immediately, we're going to miss out on millions, I would say, using the slightly whiny, demanding tone of a spoiled heiress who only cared about her trust fund growing. Daniel predictably swallowed the bait whole. He excitedly updated me on his vast network of connections, bragging about how quickly he was cutting through the red tape. He had absolutely no idea that the zoning officials he was whining and dining the partners he was signing term sheets with were all highly paid actors and associates hired by Mr. Lawson. Mr. Lawson had orchestrated a masterpiece. From forged environmental impact studies to counterfeit escrow accounts, everything was executed with undetectable sophistication. Daniel firmly believed he was holding the golden goose. His greed morphed into sheer mania. He didn't just invest the millions he had siphoned from Apex. He began secretly leveraging Apex's core assets, including the very Winnetka mansion we lived in, to secure massive bridge loans from shadow lenders. He wanted to own the entire Maui project himself. He didn't want to share a single cent of the profit. While Daniel was busy sprinting into his own grave, Mia wasn't exactly sitting still. She genuinely believed her coronation as the new queen of Apex Construction was imminent. She stopped hiding her affair entirely. When my mother was out of the house, she would drape herself over Daniel, kissing him openly right in front of me. She treated me like a ghost, haunting my own home. One evening, she had the sheer audacity to sit in my designated chair at the head of the dining table. Mimicking my posture, she swirled a glass of expensive Cabernet and cooed at Daniel Honey. "How do I look sitting here? Does it suit me?" Daniel just chuckled indulgently. I kept my head down and quietly ate my salad, but the inferno in my chest roared. "Keep smiling," I told myself. "Keep gloating. The day is coming when you'll be sobbing on your knees." Behind the scenes, my mother and Mr. Jenkins were moving with lethal efficiency. Jenkins, using his clearance as accounting director, secretly cloned every single wire transfer receipt and loan origination document Daniel executed for the Ghost Project. Meanwhile, my mother utilized her deep state political contacts to try and unearth the identity of Mr. X. But the man was a digital phantom. He left zero footprint. This terrified us. Who was this man, and why was he helping Daniel destroy us? Was there a dark secret buried in Apex Construction's history that we didn't know about? Then, one Tuesday afternoon, Daniel burst through the front doors, practically vibrating with excitement. He announced that all the final hurdles had been cleared. Tomorrow morning, he would execute the final transaction, wiring a staggering sum of money into the escrow account of the shell company to officially break ground on the Maui resort. "Natalie, tomorrow is going to go down in history," he said, grabbing me by the waist, his voice shaking with euphoria. "After tomorrow, we are going to be the wealthiest couple in Chicago." I gasped in feigned delight, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. Tomorrow, Judgment Day, had finally arrived. "We absolutely have to celebrate tonight," I said, putting on my best adoring voice. "I'm going to make your favorite dinner." He nodded, kissing my cheek. I hurried into the kitchen, not to cook, but to pull out my encrypted phone. I texted my mother the code phrase indicating the whale was entering the net. She replied with a single chilling line. "The board is set. Execute the play." I took a deep breath. Tonight would be the very last night I would ever have to endure this sickening hypocrisy. During dinner, I played the ultimate Stepford wife. I served him a prime rib roast, poured him glass after glass of vintage Napa Cabernet, and stroked his ego until it threatened to burst. Daniel drank heavily, intoxicated by the alcohol and his impending total victory. He had no idea he was drinking a condemned man's last meal. After dinner, Daniel stumbled upstairs, heavily inebriated. Mia quickly scurried after him, using the transparent excuse that she needed to help Mr. Daniel turn down the bed. I was left completely alone in the cavernous dining room, staring at the empty wine bottles. My mind went entirely blank. I didn't feel the fiery thrill of vengeance. I only felt a bone-deep, crushing exhaustion. 10 years. A decade of my youth, my love, my unconditional trust. Who had I given it to? I stood up and slowly walked upstairs. I didn't go to the master bedroom, where I knew that filthy play was being performed yet again. I walked into my father's study. I sat in his heavy leather chair and gently ran my hand over the cool mahogany wood. "Dad, are you watching?" I whispered into the dark. "Your daughter isn't weak anymore. I'm going to protect everything you built. I promise you." The next morning, Daniel woke up at the crack of dawn. He dressed in an immaculate bespoke Italian suit, looking razor-sharp and entirely energized. He announced he was heading straight to the corporate bank to execute the final wire transfers. Before he left, he hugged me one last time. "Wait by the phone for the good news, future Madam CEO," he winked meaningfully. I smiled and nodded. The exact second Daniel's Porsche cleared the driveway, my phone buzzed. It was Evelyn. "Are you ready to initiate Natalie?" Her voice was cold, clipped, and utterly ruthless. I took a deep breath. The final act I had waited for in pure agony had officially begun. But would it go according to plan? Would Daniel's predatory instincts kick in at the last second? And would the phantom Mr. X emerge from the shadows to save him? The tension was suffocating. I knew that within the next few hours, the destiny of everyone involved would be violently decided. Moments after receiving the signal from my mother, the gears of our revenge machine began to turn with the terrifying precision of a Swiss watch. I was no longer alone in the mansion. Mr. Lawson and two of his most cutthroat junior litigators arrived through the service entrance. My father's study was instantly transformed into a corporate war room. Laptops were flipped open, displaying complex financial routing software and banking portals. The atmosphere was electric with tension, but there was zero panic. Everyone knew their exact role. Mr. Lawson's usually mild-mannered face now radiated the grim determination of a five-star general orchestrating a drone strike. Natalie Daniel just walked into the Chase Bank corporate branch downtown. One of the junior lawyers reported, his eyes glued to his screen. "Our internal monitors show he is initiating the protocols to wire $350 million into the escrow account of Golden Investment and Development LLC. Golden Investment and Development LLC. That was the exact shell company Mr. Lawson had fabricated, staffed by phantom directors and fake employees. $350 million. The sheer number made me dizzy. It represented nearly every drop of liquid capital Apex Construction had left, combined with the astronomical predatory loans Daniel had secretly taken out against our physical assets. He had pushed all his chips to the center of the table on this final hand. "Excellent, Mr. Lawson nodded, a chilling, predatory smile crossing his lips. "Let the transaction clear. The second the routing numbers verify, trigger the asset freeze. Then forward the entire unredacted dossier directly to the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI field office in Chicago. We hit him with a tactical nuke. Do not give him a single second to breathe, let alone counterattack." At that exact moment, in another part of the city, Mia was experiencing her own delusions of grandeur. She firmly believed Daniel had already won. She believed today was the day she officially ascended to the throne. That morning she had requested the day off, claiming a family emergency back home. But she hadn't gone home. Private investigators hired by my mother had tracked her straight to the Magnificent Mile. She threw herself into the high-end luxury boutiques like a moth to a flame, spending money with psychotic abandon. She bought $15,000 Birkin bags, $50,000 diamond necklaces, designer gowns. She was no longer playing the timid maid. She was a queen pillaging her newly conquered kingdom. She even had the monumental stupidity to call a friend back in her hometown, loudly bragging in the middle of a Prada store that she was about to marry a billionaire and move to a private island. Every single swipe of her credit card, every boastful phone call, was meticulously recorded by our PI, cementing the final bricks in her federal indictment for wire fraud and conspiracy. Sitting in the war room listening to the live updates, my heart was a violently swirling vortex of emotions. On one hand, I felt a dark, intoxicating rush of vindication, watching my enemies march willingly into the slaughterhouse. But on the other hand, I felt a crushing sadness. It was the tragedy of human greed. Daniel was a brilliant, talented man who could have had a phenomenal, legitimate career. Instead, he buried himself alive for the sake of boundless ambition. And Mia, a young girl who could have lived a decent life, chose the path of a parasite, willingly drowning in a delusion of stolen wealth. Wire transfer confirmed and settled. Daniel has exited the bank, the junior lawyer announced. "Execute the freeze." "Send the files," Lawson ordered, his voice echoing like a judge's gavel. Everything happened at lightning speed. Downtown Daniel was walking out of the bank lobby, grinning like a lottery winner. He pulled out his phone to call Mia and share the glorious news. But simultaneously, the $350 million account was locked by federal authorities. The emergency arrest warrants for him and his co-conspirators were already printing out at the federal courthouse. The net had been thrown, and the shark had swam right into it. But life is rarely as clean as a Hollywood movie. Just when we thought we had achieved total checkmate, a catastrophic variable entered the equation. Mr. Lawson's cell phone rang violently. It was Mr. Jenkins, the accounting director. His voice on the other end was hysterical. "Arthur, it's a disaster. The entire Apex mainframe is under a massive cyber attack. It's a zero-day ransomware strike. Every single financial ledger, vendor, contract, and client database is being actively encrypted. The hackers are demanding an astronomical ransom. The entire war room went dead silent. A cyber attack. Right at this exact second. Was it a coincidence? Or was it a coordinated counterstrike, Mr. X?" I blurted out, panic gripping my throat. "It has to be him. He figured out our play and he's burning the house down to destroy the evidence." My mother, who had been a pillar of ice-cold strength this entire time, visibly paled. She had perfectly calculated every single psychological flaw of Daniel, but she hadn't accounted for an invisible phantom capable of launching a military-grade cyber attack. If Apex Construction's master servers were wiped, even if Daniel went to federal prison, the company would be completely irreversibly annihilated. "Everyone stay calm, Mr." Lawson urged, though sweat was beading on his forehead. "We need to trace the origin vector. Jenkins, can your IT guys backtrace the IP? We're trying, Arthur, but these guys are elite. They're bouncing through a dozen VPNs and dark web proxies. It's practically impossible to trace them," Jenkins yelled in despair. In the midst of this suffocating panic, my mother's personal cell phone began to ring. It was a blocked number. Evelyn hesitated for a fraction of a second, then hit accept and put it on speakerphone. A man's voice echoed through the quiet study. It was low, raspy, and terrifyingly familiar. "Hello, Evelyn. It's been a while. I imagine you're quite thrilled that your idiot son-in-law is about to be fitted for an orange jumpsuit, aren't you?" "Who is this?" my mother demanded, her voice dripping with ice. "Who I am is irrelevant. What is relevant is that as of this exact second, the life support plug for Apex Construction is in my hand." The voice let out a dark, grating chuckle. "I'm giving you two choices, Evelyn. Option 1, you sit there and watch the empire Arthur spent his entire life building burn to the ground. Option 2, you immediately withdraw all federal complaints, pull the FBI off, Daniel, and legally transfer 70% of Apex's voting shares directly to my holding company. You have exactly 1 hour to decide." The line went dead. The room felt like all the oxygen had been sucked out. We had fallen into a trap exponentially larger than the one we had set for Daniel. The true apex predator, the phantom known as Mr. X, had finally stepped into the light. He didn't just want a payout. He wanted the entire kingdom. He had identified our fatal weak point, my father's legacy, and struck at the most lethal possible moment. 1 hour. We had 60 minutes to make a choice that would dictate the rest of our lives. Do we surrender to an omnipotent, invisible enemy, or did we have one final desperate card left to play? In that moment, all hope felt entirely extinguished. Dear listeners, the battle seems to be hurtling toward a tragic end, but even in the darkest abyss, a sliver of light can remain. If you believe the righteous will ultimately prevail, show your support by subscribing to this channel, because only together will we find the strength to reach the explosive conclusion of this story. 1 hour, 60 minutes, 3600 seconds. Time had never felt so heavy, dragging like lead weights. Every tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hallway sounded like a judge's gavel striking against my skull. We were completely cornered, pushed to the absolute brink of the abyss. The shadow enemy known as Mr. X had delivered a fatal, unseen blow straight into the heart of Apex Construction. He didn't just want to bail Daniel out, he wanted to swallow us whole. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice trembling with raw panic. "Do we accept his terms? Let's just save the company's data first and figure out the rest later." Mr. Lawson immediately shook his head vehemently. "Absolutely not. If we yield to blackmail of this magnitude, there will be a second demand and a third. He will bleed you dry until there's nothing left. Handing over 70% of the voting shares is literally handing the keys to the castle over to a terrorist. But if we don't accept all, the servers will be wiped. The company will instantly default on its contracts and we go bankrupt anyway. We lose everything," I cried out, utterly helpless. The air in the room was stifling. Mr. Lawson and the junior attorneys all looked to my mother, waiting for the matriarch to make the final call. Evelyn had remained entirely silent since the phone call ended. But looking at her now, her expression was bizarre. She wasn't panicked. She wasn't defeated. In her eyes, there was a chilling, absolute calm, a terrifyingly sharp glint of predatory intelligence. She stood up slowly, walked over to the large bay window, and stared out at the manicured gardens my father used to tend to. "He calculated this very carefully," she said, her voice low and remarkably steady. "He knows our Achilles heel is Arthur's legacy. He assumes we won't dare risk losing it. He accurately assessed the value of the company, but he drastically miscalculated one crucial thing. She turned to face us, and a mysterious, almost wicked smile crept onto her lips. He miscalculated Arthur, and he miscalculated me. "Mom, what are you talking about?" I asked, completely bewildered. Evelyn walked back to my father's massive mahogany desk. She ran her hand affectionately over the polished wood. "Your father was a man who always looked 10 steps ahead. He knew the corporate world was a battlefield filled with cutthroats and jackals. He never kept all his eggs in one basket." She reached under the heavy desk and pressed her thumb against an intricate carved floral pattern on the central leg. With a soft click, a hidden drawer, one I had never known existed, slid smoothly out from the wood paneling. Inside there was no jewelry, no stacks of cash. There was only a bulky, outdated satellite phone and a small leather-bound codebook. "What is that?" I asked, staring at it. "This," my mother said, her eyes flashing with fierce pride, "is Arthur's Plan B. This satellite phone is hardwired to an entirely independent offline server farm located in Switzerland. Every single piece of critical data from Apex Construction from the day the company was founded up until last month is cloned and securely archived there. It is physically severed from the internal corporate network. Mr. X's ransomware can burn the current servers to ash, but he can never touch the true heart of Apex. Mr. Lawson and I stood there, utterly paralyzed by shock. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My father had literally prepared for a doomsday scenario years before he died. He was like a master tactician who had anticipated a siege long before the enemy even arrived at the gates. So we're saved," I stammered, hot tears suddenly pricking my eyes. But this time they were tears of profound relief. "We are not just saved," my mother said, her gaze turning lethal. "We are going to counterattack. He thinks he holds the knife to our throats. He's sitting there waiting for us to call him and beg. He has no idea that the call he's about to receive will be the final nail in his coffin." She picked up the bulky satellite phone. "Arthur, get the recording equipment patched in. Natalie, I need you to act. You need to sound like you are having a total mental breakdown. Let's put on one final show for him." I took a deep, shuddering breath, instantly grasping my mother's strategy. We were going to feign total surrender. We would buy time, lure him out of the shadows, and record the extortion attempt as federal evidence. My mother dialed the blocked number back. "Well," the familiar raspy voice answered immediately. "What is the verdict? My finger is getting tired, hovering over the delete key." "We accept, please, we accept," my mother cried out, her voice trembling perfectly with staged hysteria. "Please don't destroy Apex. We'll drop the FBI charges. We'll transfer the 70% equity. Just give us the decryption keys. Ha ha ha," the man laughed, a cruel, gloating sound. "Look who's suddenly so agreeable." "Fine. But how do I know you're not going to pull a fast one with the feds? We wouldn't dare," I sobbed loudly into the receiver, playing my part. "Please. Just tell us what to do. To ensure a smooth transition, I'll be coming to collect the signed equity transfer documents in person," Mr. X said arrogantly. "Tonight, at 8:00 p.m., at your mother's 60th birthday gala. I think it's the perfect poetic venue to officially introduce the new majority shareholder of Apex Construction to the world." He had walked face first into his own trap. His ego was so gargantuan, his desire to publicly humiliate us and revel in his victory so overwhelming, that he was willing to step into the light. At my birthday gala, my mother gasped, feigning horror. "Exactly. I hear you've invited half the elite in Chicago. It's the perfect opportunity for me to announce the changing of the guard. Have the paperwork ready, Evelyn. Don't try anything stupid." "You know the consequences," he growled, and the line clicked dead. The call ended, but the heavy dread in the room had evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, militant silence. My mother turned to me. "Natalie, did you hear that? The entertaining show I promised you. The premiere is tonight." I nodded, my heart no longer filled with fear. I knew tonight was going to be a night Chicago would never forget. My mother's 60th birthday gala, which was supposed to be a warm, elegant celebration of a milestone, was instantly repurposed into a battlefield. It became the grand stage for our final theatrical performance. Preparations moved at warp speed. The event planners were still decorating the Winnetka estate in lavish opulence, catering companies were setting up, and the string quartet was tuning their instruments. But beneath the surface, a covert operation was deploying. Mr. Lawson contacted the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office. A team of elite undercover federal agents infiltrated the catering staff and the valet crew, their concealed earpieces blending into the chaos, ready to breach the moment the signal was given. I reviewed the guest list my mother had drafted weeks ago, and a sudden realization hit me. She hadn't just invited close friends and board members, she had invited prominent journalists, editors of the Chicago Tribune, and major financial anchors. She didn't just want to arrest Mr. X and Daniel. She wanted to publicly execute their reputations in front of the entire world. That evening, I slipped into a stunning crimson evening gown, a color that symbolized both spilled blood and unyielding authority. My mother wore an elegant, sweeping midnight blue dress. We stood side by side in front of the full-length mirror. We were no longer the weeping, betrayed victims. We were armored generals ready for the final clash. "Are you ready, my girl?" my mother asked softly. I squeezed her hand tightly. "I'm ready, Mom." The party of destiny began. The high society guests began to arrive in a parade of luxury cars. Soft classical music floated through the air, mingling with the clinking of crystal champagne flutes and polite laughter. But behind the glittering facade, a violent storm was brewing, promising a night of unprecedented explosive drama. As night fell, a velvet darkness enveloped the sprawling estate gardens. Hundreds of glowing lanterns and fairy lights hung from the oak trees, transforming the grounds into a luminous palace. It was a spectacular event, but none of the distinguished guests sipping vintage champagne knew that they were about to become involuntary spectators to the most shocking scandal in Chicago's corporate history. Meanwhile, in a luxury penthouse overlooking the Chicago River, Daniel and Mia were preparing for their grand triumphant entrance. Daniel was dressed in a bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo, his hair slicked back perfectly. He admired himself in the mirror with a predatory smirk. He had received the encrypted text from Mr. X. The cyber attack had been a flawless victory, and the stupid bitch and the old hag had thrown in the towel. Tonight he wouldn't just be the VP, he would be the untouchable king of Apex. "How do I look, baby?" Mia asked, stepping out of the walk-in closet. She was wearing a skin-tight black designer gown that left little to the imagination. Around her neck rested a blinding diamond tennis necklace Daniel had bought her with stolen funds. There was absolutely zero trace of the timid housekeeper left. She was a queen parading her stolen loot. "Drop-dead gorgeous," Daniel said, turning around to pull her into a deep kiss. "Tonight you are going to be the most beautiful, powerful woman in that room. Everyone will bow to you, my queen." Mia giggled, wrapping her arms around his neck in pure ecstasy. "I can't wait. I want to see the look on Natalie's face when we walk in. She's probably going to die of shock." "I don't give a damn if she's shocked or not," Daniel sneered, a flash of pure malice in his eyes. "The only thing that matters is that after tonight she signs the divorce papers and disappears into the gutter where she belongs." They toasted their premature victory with a glass of Dom Perignon, entirely oblivious that they were drinking the last drops of their freedom. Back at the mansion, my mother and I stood in the grand foyer receiving the guests. I maintained a bright, welcoming smile, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries like a seasoned politician, but my mind was running at 1,000 miles an hour. My anxiety spiked with every passing minute. I shot covert glances at the waiters passing hors d'oeuvres. Beneath their crisp white tuxedo jackets, I could spot the faint outlines of shoulder holsters. Mr. Lawson was mingling near the bar, sipping a club soda. He looked like any other boring corporate lawyer, but I knew the battered leather briefcase resting securely between his feet contained the nuclear launch codes. At exactly 7:30 p.m., Daniel's black Porsche Panamera rolled up the driveway. He stepped out first, looking like James Bond, and gallantly opened the passenger door for Mia. She didn't shy away. She strutted up the marble steps, linking her arm through his. She walked right up to me, flashing that sickeningly fake smile. "Natalie, honey, we made it," she said, leaning in close to whisper in my ear. "You look beautiful tonight, but I have a feeling you won't be smiling for much longer." It was a blatant, arrogant declaration of war. I just maintained a serene, razor-sharp smile. "Oh, I agree entirely. Someone here definitely won't be smiling by the end of the night." My unflinching confidence threw her off balance for a second, but she quickly dismissed it, assuming I was just putting up a pathetic, brave front. The gala carried on. Guests dined on Wagyu beef and lobster, the liquor flowed, and no one sensed the invisible noose tightening around the room. My mother and I continued circulating, thanking everyone for coming. All eyes naturally gravitated toward Evelyn, admiring her timeless grace. None of them realized this benevolent widow was the architect of a revenge plot that was about to shatter their reality. At exactly 8:00 p.m., a sleek black Rolls-Royce pulled up to the front doors. A hush fell over the valet stand. Everyone turned to look, wondering who the final VIP was. The door opened and a middle-aged man stepped out. He was dressed in a conservative, impeccable gray suit. He had a warm, grandfatherly face and wore gold-rimmed glasses, exuding the aura of a highly educated, benevolent philanthropist. But the moment I laid eyes on him, my blood turned to liquid nitrogen. My lungs seized. I recognized him, the raspy, low voice from the extortion call. It belonged to this man, the phantom Mr. X. But what sent me into a state of absolute paralyzed horror was that this man was not a stranger. He was my father's oldest, dearest friend, the man I had grown up respecting, the man I affectionately called Uncle Bradley. He was a senior member of the Apex Board of Directors. He was the man who had sat in our living room and held my hand while I wept after my father's funeral, promising to protect us. No, it can't be Uncle Bradley, my mind screamed in denial. Why? Why him? A man who was practically family, the man my father trusted implicitly, was the apex predator orchestrating our destruction. My mother saw him too. For a fraction of a second, her jaw tightened, but she instantly recovered her mask of flawless hospitality. She stepped forward, opening her arms with a warm smile. "Bradley, thank you so much for coming to celebrate with me." Mr. Bradley returned the embrace with a paternal, majestic smile. "Evelyn, happy birthday. You know I would never miss this. Taking care of Arthur's family is my greatest duty." But in his eyes I saw it now, a sickeningly smug, malicious gleam. Daniel immediately rushed over to greet him. "Uncle Bradley, so glad you made it." "Well done, my boy," Bradley murmured, patting Daniel on the shoulder. "Tonight is going to be a very historic night for you." The three of them, the mastermind, the traitor, and the homewrecker, stood together in the center of the room, laughing and sipping champagne. Seeing them together inflicted a pain far worse than catching Daniel in bed. Betrayal by a stranger is one thing, but a knife in the back from someone you consider family is a mortal wound. I looked at my mother. Her eyes met mine. The calm was gone, replaced by a reservoir of agony and absolute biblical wrath. She squeezed my hand, her fingers ice cold. Tonight was no longer just about taking back a company. It was a fight to the death with the devil himself. The true storm had finally made landfall. The party raged on, but for me, the ballroom had transformed into a surreal circle of hell. Every polite laugh, every clinking glass felt grotesque. My brain was short-circuiting, trying to process the revelation. Uncle Bradley. Mr. X. All the puzzle pieces violently snapped together, forming a horrifying tapestry of long-game betrayal. I remembered all the times Bradley had visited after my father's death. "Don't worry, Natalie. As long as I'm here, no one will take advantage of you. Daniel is a brilliant kid. Let him run the day-to-day operations. Trust him." Every comforting word was a calculated maneuver to put his puppet in power. He wasn't our protector. He was the wolf, patiently waiting for the sheep to fatten up. I watched Daniel and Bradley standing near the ice sculpture, laughing like a proud father and son. One was the puppet, the other the puppeteer. Together, they had orchestrated a masterpiece of deception to steal my family's legacy. And Mia stood slightly behind Daniel, gazing at Bradley with absolute reverence as if he were a mafia don blessing her ascension. The three pillars of our destruction stood in the center of my home, drunk on their impending victory. They had no idea the guillotine blade was already falling. "Natalie, what's wrong? You're shaking," my mother whispered, slipping her arm through mine to steady me. I shook my head, fighting back tears of sheer rage. "I'm okay, Mom. I was just thinking about how much it would break Dad's heart if he could see this." My mother went deadly silent for a moment, then her voice hardened into steel. "No, Natalie. Your father would be immensely proud. Proud that we are ruthless enough to protect his legacy and annihilate the parasites who betrayed him. Do not show them an ounce of weakness. Hold your head up. Tonight we are the executioners." Her words hit me like a shot of adrenaline. She was right. I couldn't break down. Not for myself, not for her, and certainly not for my father's memory. At exactly 8:30 p.m., when the gala was at its absolute peak, my mother caught the eye of the event manager and gave a subtle nod. The ambient lighting in the grand ballroom slowly dimmed, and a bright spotlight illuminated a small stage erected at the far end of the room. The string quartet stopped playing. The chatter died down as hundreds of faces turned toward the light. My mother, looking like royalty in her midnight blue gown, gracefully climbed the steps to the stage. She took the microphone, a warm, radiant smile gracing her lips. "Dear friends, esteemed colleagues, and beloved family, thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining me tonight to celebrate my 60th birthday." Her voice was smooth and melodic, echoing perfectly through the silent room. 60 years. It is a long journey filled with immense joy and profound sorrow. I was blessed with a brilliant husband, a wonderful daughter, and true loyal friends. I consider myself the luckiest woman in the world. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the sea of faces, deliberately stopping exactly where Bradley and Daniel were standing. Among these friends is a man my late husband and I considered a brother, a man who stood by our side during our darkest hours. I want to take this moment to give him a very special thank you. Bradley, would you do me the honor of joining me on stage? A wave of polite applause rippled through the ballroom. Everyone in the Chicago elite knew of the legendary friendship between Arthur and Bradley. Bradley looked slightly surprised, but his ego quickly took over. He smiled a sickeningly humble smile, buttoned his suit jacket, and walked up to the stage. He assumed my mother was about to publicly capitulate and hand him the company in front of the press. He embraced her warmly for the cameras. "Evelyn, you're too kind. It is my absolute honor to protect Arthur's family." My mother smiled a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Bradley, before I give you your special gift, I want to share a short video presentation with you and all our guests. A little trip down memory lane." She gestured to the AV technician. A massive projection screen descended behind the stage and flared to life. Bradley and Daniel, who was standing in the front row, both looked incredibly smug, waiting for a touching tribute video, but the footage that flashed onto the massive screen was not a montage of family vacations. The first clip was crystal clear, high-definition night vision footage. It was the recording from my bedroom. The screen broadcasted a massive, undeniable view of Daniel and Mia, naked and violently entangled in my marital bed, accompanied by the unmistakable amplified audio of their moans. The entire ballroom recoiled in absolute shock. The silence was instantly shattered by gasps of horror and disgusted murmurs. A woman dropped her champagne flute. The crystal shattered against the marble floor with a sharp crack that echoed like a gunshot. Mia, standing near the front, let out a strangled shriek. The blood drained from her face, turning her the color of chalk. Her knees buckled and she collapsed against a cocktail table. Daniel's eyes bulged out of his skull. He stood, frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish, unable to process the nightmare unfolding in front of his peers. On stage, Bradley flinched violently. His mask of benevolent superiority cracked into genuine panic. He had not expected his cornered prey to launch a suicide bombing in the middle of a high-society gala. "Are you surprised?" my mother asked into the microphone. Her voice was no longer warm. It was an icy, booming command. I was certainly surprised. Surprised by the depravity of the son-in-law I trusted and the sheer audacity of the maid my daughter treated like family. "But my dear friends," she continued, her voice slicing through the chaotic murmurs, "that is not the main event." She signaled the booth again. The screen cut to a new video. This time it was hidden camera footage from Daniel's office. It showed Daniel receiving a thick briefcase of cash from a known corrupt zoning official. It cut to a recording of Daniel and Mia bragging about stealing the company. It showed Mia in Prada swiping the stolen corporate Amex. And finally, the screen displayed massive, blown-up screenshots of the text messages between Daniel and Mr. X's, explicitly detailing the cyber attack, the blackmail, and the plot to orchestrate a fatal car accident for my mother and me. The ballroom erupted. The initial shock morphed into outrage. Titans of industry, politicians, and journalists began shouting, "Good God, he's a monster. Call the police immediately. Is that wire fraud?" Daniel finally snapped out of his paralysis. He pointed frantically at the screen, screaming like a lunatic. "It's a deepfake. It's AI. It's all fake. That crazy bitch is trying to frame me. Don't look at it." Bradley, realizing his empire was collapsing in real time, snatched the microphone from my mother's hand. "Please, everyone calm down," he yelled, though his voice wavered with undisguised terror. "This is clearly a grotesque misunderstanding. Someone has hacked the AV system to defame this family. A misunderstanding. Defamation." My mother stepped up to the podium, her posture radiating absolute dominance. She didn't need a microphone. Her voice carried like thunder. "Then I wonder how you will explain this final video, Bradley." The screen flickered one last time. What appeared next silenced Bradley instantly and plunged the entire room into a state of absolute paralyzing horror. It wasn't high def. It was grainy black and white security footage. In the bottom corner, the timestamp flashed a date. The exact date my father died. I felt a physical blow to my chest. "Mom, what is this?" I whispered, gripping the edge of a table. She didn't answer. Her eyes were locked onto the screen, blazing with a hatred she had kept buried in the dark for 2 years. The video showed the hallway outside the ICU at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. It showed my mother and me weeping hysterically as the doctor shook his head, delivering the news that my father's heart had given out. My mother fainted in the video, and I collapsed against the wall. That memory was a permanent scar on my soul. But then the camera angle shifted to a blind spot near the emergency stairwell. Two men were standing in the shadows. The resolution was poor, but the figures were unmistakable. It was Daniel and Uncle Bradley. They had no idea a dusty, supposedly broken security camera was recording their every move. There was no audio, but the visual was damning. Bradley reached into his tailored jacket pocket and pulled out a small, dark amber glass vial. He handed it to Daniel. Daniel took it, nodded grimly, and slipped it into his own pocket. Bradley then patted Daniel on the shoulder, a gesture of sinister encouragement, and the two men walked away in opposite directions. The video ended. The silence in the ballroom was heavier than a graveyard. Everyone with half a brain understood exactly what was in that vial. "Bradley," my mother roared. It was no longer the voice of a CEO or a society matriarch. It was the primal, blood-curdling roar of a lioness who had watched her mate get slaughtered. "Do you have anything to say? What was in that little vial? Was it the experimental cardio supplement you begged me to give my husband every morning? The one you swore was an elite imported vitamin, the one that was actually a slow-acting, untraceable toxin that degraded his heart muscle until it caused a massive, fatal coronary event?" Every word struck Bradley like a physical bullet. He staggered backward, his face the color of wet ash. No, that's absurd. It's a lie. It was just a vitamin," he stammered, raising his hands in a pathetic display of defense. "A vitamin." My mother laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "Arthur Lawson, if you please." Mr. Lawson marched onto the stage, plugging his own laptop into the projector. A heavily redacted FBI forensics report flashed onto the screen, bearing the official seal of the Department of Justice. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Lawson announced, his voice echoing with absolute legal authority. Following the CEO's sudden passing, Evelyn harbored severe suspicions. She secretly retained a private laboratory to analyze the remaining vitamins Bradley provided. The results were conclusive. The capsules contained a lethal synthesized digitalis derivative. Long-term exposure triggers acute heart failure, mimicking a standard myocardial infarction with near-perfect accuracy. That report was submitted to the FBI 6 months ago to build a federal homicide case. At that exact moment, the final pillar of Bradley's sanity collapsed. He had nowhere to run. His impenetrable conspiracy of murder, hostile takeover, and blackmail, hidden flawlessly for years, was now exposed under the glaring floodlights of high society and the press. Why, I screamed, unable to hold it back anymore, tears streaming down my face. "Why did you do it? My father loved you. He called you his brother. Are you even human?" Bradley slowly turned his head to look at me. The facade of the benevolent uncle melted away entirely, revealing a face twisted by decades of psychotic jealousy and festering hatred. "Brother," he spat, laughing like a madman. He was always the big brother. He was the genius, the visionary, the man everyone worshipped, and I was just his pathetic shadow. I built Apex with him. I bled for this company. That CEO chair belonged to me. Everything he had should have been mine. Envy. The oldest, most poisonous sin in human history had turned a best friend into a murderer. He suddenly whirled around and pointed a trembling finger at Daniel. "And you pathetic, greedy little worm. Did you actually think I was going to let you be CEO? You were a disposable pawn. The second the ink dried on those Maui contracts, I was going to cut your brake lines and send you straight to hell with your father-in-law." Hearing this, Daniel, who had already been driven to the brink of a psychotic break by the videos, shattered completely. He realized he had never been the mastermind. He had sold his soul, murdered the man who gave him everything, and ruined his life, all to be a sacrificial lamb for a madman. Before Daniel could even scream, the ballroom doors burst open. FBI, nobody move. The undercover agents disguised as waiters and valets simultaneously drew their weapons, swarming the room. Sirens wailed outside, bleeding through the stained glass windows. The glamorous birthday gala had instantly become an active federal crime scene. Guests screamed and scrambled toward the walls, giving the tactical teams a clear path. Agents tackled Bradley to the stage floor, slapping handcuffs on his wrists. Another team slammed Daniel against a cocktail table, reading him his Miranda rights. Mia, who had been hyperventilating in the corner, passed out completely and was dragged away by 2 officers. The curtain had violently fallen. The villains were being hauled away in chains. But as I stood in the center of the chaotic ballroom watching the flashing red and blue lights, I didn't feel a single ounce of victory. I only felt an expanding hollow void in my chest. The husband I had loved with my entire being was a murderer. The uncle I had revered was a monster. I broke down sobbing like a lost child and threw my arms around my mother. She held me tight, stroking my trembling back as tears silently tracked down her own cheeks. "It's over, Natalie," she whispered fiercely into my hair. "It's finally over. We won." But I knew the truth. In a war like this, there are no real winners. We were all just survivors in the tragic wreckage of our own lives. The storm had passed, leaving behind nothing but desolation and ruins. The luxurious Winnetka estate, which had been filled with music and laughter just the night before, was now submerged in a mourning-like silence. The fairy lights and decorative ribbons still hung from the ceilings, but they looked sad and pathetic. Shards of broken crystal and abandoned plates of expensive food littered the floor, mute witnesses to a fatal night that had irreversibly altered the destiny of so many people. My mother and I sat in the living room. Neither of us spoke. The morning sun poured through the massive windows, but it couldn't dispel the freezing, somber atmosphere that clung to our skin. The criminals were locked in federal holding cells, but the psychological fallout was suffocating. The grief, the trauma, the sheer disgust, it all blended into an invisible boulder crushing my soul. The arrests of Daniel and Bradley triggered a localized earthquake in Chicago. The media went absolutely feral. Every news network and newspaper ran front-page exposés: the demonic son-in-law, the lethal betrayal of Apex Construction, a 30-year friendship ended by poison, the Iron Widow who exposed a murder at her own birthday party. Our names were plastered everywhere. Pundits praised my mother's terrifying genius and courage. The public raged at the sheer sociopathic cruelty of the perpetrators. Naturally, Apex Construction suffered a massive shockwave. Stock prices plummeted, vendors panicked, and active job sites ground to a halt. The empire my father had built was teetering on the edge of total collapse. But my mother, the woman I feared would finally break after confronting the man who murdered her husband, proved her superhuman resilience once again. She refused to allow herself a moment of weakness. The very next morning, she convened an emergency meeting of the board of directors and the major shareholders. She didn't stand before them as a grieving widow. She stood before them as a wartime general. She laid out the entire truth, took responsibility for the lapses in corporate oversight, and unveiled an aggressive, comprehensive restructuring plan. Apex Construction has just sailed through a Category 5 hurricane, she declared, her voice echoing through the boardroom with unyielding authority. But gold is tested in fire. I am officially coming out of retirement to resume my position as chairwoman of the board. Alongside my daughter Natalie as the acting CEO, we are going to rebuild this company from the bedrock up. We will prove to the world that Apex was not built on the backs of traitors and thieves, but on sweat, integrity, and unbreakable steel. Her speech was a masterclass in leadership. It injected a desperate dose of hope into the terrified stakeholders. Under her guidance, and with the ironclad legal protection of Mr. Lawson and the loyalty of the remaining staff, Apex Construction slowly pulled out of its death spiral. I threw myself into the role of CEO like a woman possessed. It was my only coping mechanism to outrun the grief. I was no longer the naive, artsy girl who relied on her husband to handle the math. I learned how to dissect forensic audits, negotiate brutal union contracts, and ruthlessly cut corporate fat. I grew up, but it was a growth paid for in blood, tears, and scars that would never fully fade. The federal trial for Bradley, Daniel, and Mia took place nearly a year later. I had to face them in the courtroom. Daniel looked skeletal, his skin a sickly gray. There was absolutely nothing left of the charismatic, handsome executive I had married. He couldn't even bring himself to look in my direction. He kept his eyes glued to the defense table. Bradley maintained his stoic posture, but the arrogant fire in his eyes had burned out, leaving only a hollow, pathetic void. And Mia just wept constantly, begging the judge for mercy, claiming she was manipulated, but it was far too late for tears. Faced with Mr. Lawson's mountain of irrefutable evidence, the jury didn't deliberate long. The judge handed down the sentences. Bradley was sentenced to life in federal prison, without the possibility of parole for first-degree murder, extortion, and massive wire fraud. Daniel was slapped with 45 years for conspiracy to commit murder, embezzlement, and money laundering. Mia received 15 years in a federal penitentiary for her active role in the fraud and laundering scheme. Justice had been served. The gavel struck the block. But as I sat in the gallery and listened to the numbers, my heart didn't soar with triumph. I only felt an infinite crushing sorrow. Love, friendship, trust. It had all ended in a sterile courtroom wrapped in orange jumpsuits and handcuffs. A few weeks after the trial, I received a letter from Daniel mailed from the federal penitentiary. I opened it. There were no apologies. He didn't ask for my forgiveness. He simply confessed that from the very first day he married into my family, he felt like an inferior peasant. He was consumed by jealousy of my father's natural brilliance, jealous of my inherited wealth, jealous of a life he felt he had to steal rather than earn. He wanted to prove he was the smartest man in the room. His inferiority complex and unchecked greed had turned him into a monster. I read the letter, once struck a match, and watched it burn to ash in the sink. Life for my mother and me slowly established a new baseline, a new normal, a life without Daniel, a life without fake smiles and hidden daggers. The Winnetka mansion was much quieter, much emptier, but it was finally at peace. Once Apex Construction stabilized and returned to profitability, my mother stepped back, delegating the vast majority of the corporate empire to me. She spent her days tending to her magnificent rose gardens, reading in the sunroom, and directing a massive philanthropic foundation in my father's name. One crisp autumn afternoon, my mother and I drove out to visit my father's grave. It was located in a serene private cemetery on a hill, overlooking the vast steel-blue expanse of Lake Michigan. We laid a large bouquet of white chrysanthemums, his favorite, against the polished granite headstone. "Arthur, we're here," my mother said softly, her voice catching slightly in the wind. "Rest in peace, my love. The monsters have been locked away in the dark. I protected your empire. I protected our little girl. I kept my promise." I stood shoulder to shoulder with my mother, staring at the engraved letters of his name. "Dad." "I'm so sorry," I whispered into the cold breeze. "Forgive me for being so blind. Forgive me for being weak. But Dad, the Natalie standing here today is different. I'm going to be okay. I'm going to carry the weight of this family on my shoulders for you. And I swear to God I will never let anyone hurt Mom or tear down what you built." A gentle gust of wind swept off the lake, rustling the autumn leaves and carrying the faint, clean scent of pine. I closed my eyes, and for a brief, beautiful moment I could have sworn I felt my father smiling down at us.